And so it's come down to this. If you're of the opinion that McLaren losing in Qatar had everything to do with strategy and nothing to do with pace, I have at least one person who would disagree with you. Mark Hughes from Formula1.com wrote an article this week in which he said, Piastri's second stint was for 18 laps, in which time he reduced his deficit by 4 seconds, an average of just 0.22 seconds per lap. That includes the overlap between laps 24 and 32, where Piastri's tyres were 17 laps newer than Verstappen's, and only 10 laps between laps 33 and 42, when Verstappen's were 8 laps newer than Piastri's. So Piastri had an average tyre age advantage during that time, yet his gain was only 0.22 seconds per lap to a relatively cruising Verstappen. I think that's pretty interesting. I mean, of course, it makes sense, right? The McLarens were hugely screwed by their strategy. I think Oscar was on for the race win. I think it was a guaranteed Oscar race win. And with that said, following their strategy blunder, the McLarens had to push essentially flat out for the entire race. So if you compare that to Max, on the other hand, where GP was kind of telling him, just put in good stints, but let's keep the tires alive, a 0.22 second per lap advantage is not quite what you would be expecting if the McLaren in fact was the dominant car of the race. Something else to think about is the pace difference between the McLarens. Look at this graph. On the scatter plots, which you can see represent stint A and stint B, the fuel adjusted times, you see Norris and Piastri, and what do you know? The same thing we saw on screen is true in the numbers. Norris was pretty considerably slower than Oscar. I think you can see from their stints that regardless of degradation and so on your average lap, Piastri was a bit quicker than Norris, which is something we have not seen in quite some time. It appears that Norris has gotten his mojo back, which I, for one, am very, very happy to see. I am a big early Piastri coin investor. So I'm super happy to see that he is back. Hopefully he is back. Now, I want you to pay special attention to that box and whisker at the bottom of your screen. I will make it larger so that you can see the real difference between Oscar and Lando over the course of Qatar. And you'll be able to see there that the difference is about 0.32 seconds per lap between the two of them. So if you now put that in context with Max as well, 0.22, that means that even despite the fact that Lando was pushing flat out for the entire race, he was a tenth slower than Max, who, as Mark Hughes said, was cruising. So I think all of this makes for a pretty excellent Abu Dhabi. But what do we know about Abu Dhabi, and who's likely to do well there? I was wondering myself earlier how many overtakes there were at Abu Dhabi last year, and when I looked it up, I found that Abu Dhabi is pretty mid. And by mid, I really mean mid. I mean like middle of the field, 31 overtakes at Abu Dhabi in 2024. And just to give that some context, the average number of overtakes in 2024 was 33. So 31 is essentially average. So overtakes can be made. Of course, we've seen some pretty incredible overtakes at Abu Dhabi over the years, especially when drivers are desperate and really, really pushing for those final points. So there's certainly nothing to say that things can't get spicy up at the front, which I think is an expectation with a championship title that is this close. I wanted to do some more predictive work about who would actually be quick at Abu Dhabi, and of course a big part of that is trying to figure out what kind of track Abu Dhabi is in the first place. So what you're looking at right now is my data. So here you can see every track that we race at, and you can see all of their different corner profiles. So I want to highlight Abu Dhabi over there. And what you can see over here on the right, if I zoom in, we have average speed, slow ratio, medium ratio, high ratio. Now, average speed, of course, is self-explanatory. Slow ratio is how many of the corners are slow corners. Same for medium, same for high. And if we come down to Yas Marina, we will see first and foremost, it's a pretty slow circuit, 201 kilometers per hour on average, which is might sound very quick, and it is, but in F1 terms, it is slow. In fact, there are only a handful of tracks that even break below 200, being Monaco and Mexico. So to be right at the 200 line is pretty damn slow. On top of that, the ratio of corners, you can see that it's about 50%, or it's exactly 50% slow corners. There are barely any medium speed corners, and there are almost again half high speed corners. So I asked myself the question, what kind of tracks have pretty much 50-50 splits or close to that between slow and fast corners with very few medium corners? and I found some tracks that were pretty similar on paper. And of course, I'm looking in this general area because we are sorted by slow corner ratios. And what you might find is that Spain, Brazil, Las Vegas, and Hungary are all pretty similar on paper to the track we're going to this weekend. Now, I know. You're thinking like, what do Spain, Hungary, Vegas, and Brazil have in common? And I understand your point. They are very different tracks. Some of them are bangers, and some of them bang, and some. What I'm trying to do is look at it from a corner perspective, corner by corner, and say, on paper, these tracks are similar because they have similar corner types. So let's have a look at Red Bull and McLaren at these tracks in the past and try and assess whether at tracks that have such corner types, they tend to do better or worse. And yes, looking at the numbers, it's not looking good, Brev.
It's not looking good, Brev.
Now, of course, a couple of asterisks. Spain, P10 for Max Verstappen was the highest result for Red Bull. Of course, in Spain, he crashed into George on purpose and he got a 10-second time penalty. We'll talk about that in a future video. McLaren P1, however. And then Hungary, McLaren P1, Red Bull P9, again, very poor result. Vegas, I know, of course, there was the whole thing with, the double DSQ for the plankwear, but they did finish P2 on the road. Do we know where they would have finished if their ride height had been legal? No, we don't. But we do know that on the road they finished P2. And then, of course, Brazil, McLaren P1, and Max Verstappen P3. So, yes, it seems to be true. All signs point to McLaren being the quickest car in Abu Dhabi. Lando Norris won there last year. It seems to be a very good track for them. And that, of course, puts our championship questions into some focus. Now, of course, how unlikely is it that we get a Max P1, Lando P4 result that results in a swing in the championship? Well, if you look at recent history, it's pretty damn likely because that's what just happened in Qatar. Now that we're done talking about the numbers, do you want to see my aquarium? This is my aquarium. I built literally everything myself. It has some shrimp in it and some frogs and stuff. So yeah, follow for more aquarium content.